Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is FMA Discussion, episode 172, and tonight we have the pleasure of having Michael Janich here. And thank you, sir. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, Steve Gordy says hi, by the way.
Oh, cool.
He wanted me to make sure.
Thank you for passing that on. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
I got that out to you. So a lot of questions came in from viewers. And with that, kind of putting them in there with I have. So we're just gonna jump into it. Got a lot of content, folks. If you're watching, tell us where you're watching from. Smash that like button, and we're gonna get moving here. So some of the things that we lightly covered in your test run. We'll definitely go in more deeper tonight and all that. And when you alluded to your first FMA experience, if I'm not mistaken, was you went to Hawaii? Is that correct?
Well, I had heard about the Filipino martial arts, was interested in the Filipino martial arts, but back during that time, when the first, I guess, reference I saw to the Filipino martial arts was in some of David Steele's writing. So David Steele, Los Angeles law enforcement officer, noted knife expert, and he wrote for Soldier of Fortune back in the 70s, and he wrote a book called Secrets of Modern Knife Fighting. And he talked about the Filipino martial arts being a very highly evolved edge weapon culture and everything. So obviously it was something I was very interested in. Unfortunately, at that time, it wasn't really prevalent. I mean, you had some FMA communities, when you look at California, especially California, Hawaii, where there was a large Filipino cultural population, obviously that was kind of the focus. But as far as like the commercial availability of FMA instruction, it really was in its infancy back then.
Yeah, because you're thinking, I mean, in the time frame, just for folks, the time frame you're talking about generally is 80s?
Late 1970s. So late 1970s, very early 80s.
Yeah. Because as a matter of fact, when I put in perspective to the East Coast, for instance, it wasn't to the mid 70s when Gahe got to New York City. I mean, we were like further behind the West Coast. And I mean, 70s. Yeah. I mean, that's.
Yeah. And then even then, as far as the kind of the public knowledge, where do you find it? It was more of a word of mouth type of thing.
Yeah.
Being able to track down instruction, it was still very, very difficult to find back then.
Yeah. It's not like you're going to drive down Main Street and you're just going to see an FMA school and, knife fighting.
No, karate, judo, all that kind of good stuff. Taekwondo.
Yeah. You're not going to.
No FMA.
Yeah. So then, so through David Steele's work, who did you kind of find first, I guess?
So I was in the Army, stationed in Hawaii. I figured, okay, since I'm in a place where there's a large Filipino population, the odds of finding somebody would be a whole lot better. So what I did was actually reached out to the Filipino Chamber of Commerce. So I figured, went to Waipahu and, said, hey, I'm looking for active duty military, looking for instruction in the Filipino martial arts. Could you guys help me out, possibly point me in the right direction? And they started, kind of went through their stuff, gave me probably about 4, maybe 5 or 6 names of people who were actively teaching in the Filipino community. And I started making phone calls. And basically what it was they told me, you're not Filipino and we prefer to keep our art within our community. They were pretty straightforward about it. And finally,
they weren't shy, huh?
No, they were not shy, and especially when I expressed interest in knife stuff, because that's something that they kept very close to, as they still do. But what I finally found, Raymond Tabosa. So Grandmaster Tabosa, I was actually living in Pearl City at the time. He was teaching at Leeward Community College, literally like a mile away from where I was living. And he said, if you want to learn, I'll teach you stick. And I said, well, sir, I'm really interested in knife. And he's like, no, I'll teach you stick. Yeah. So again, even through his instruction was still very close hold, and had the honor of learning from him for a period of a few months, really. I was at that time as a Chinese Mandarin and Vietnamese linguist for the Army. So I was stationed at Field Station Kunia there, basically working in support of NSA, and I was working shift work. So we were essentially, our work hours were daytime in Asia. Okay. Because of that, when our shifts changed around, unfortunately, I had to curtail my study with him, but got the basics of Filipino stick work and, some of the basic mechanics of it. And that was kind of what my first formal instruction in the Filipino arts.
Yeah, it's funny. He's somebody like I've had a few people on here that his name has come up, and we kind of covered a bit, but not like, full out like other systems I've covered. It's
Yeah.
just not a lot of people that I'm finding have done that. Like, what, I guess, just in short, like what resonated with you as far as him and his style or system,
It was what I got from it was pretty basic, and again, I was unfortunately limited as far as the time I could work with him. But emphasized cinco teros, a lot of largo mano type of stuff. Really didn't get into a lot of live hand work, so it's primarily a lot of largo mano type of stuff, and just really focusing on basic strikes, basic footwork, real fundamental stuff.
Okay. All right. Yeah. We're going to have to find. We got already some people saying hello to you. Okay. All right, folks. If you're watching, tell us where you're watching from. Smash that like button. We got Eric, Jay, Jay. We got Brian Lee Smith from Vancouver. We got Bruce, Gene from Canada. And we got John. Love that damn Hurt C-Lot series. we'll have to find out what that's about. But so all right. So then after that, like. What's that?
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Good point. And I know, like doing this show. Careful what you wish for.
Yep.
Because of a bunch of side dishes. But anyhow, we got out. But so what was after that? Like, I know you had to be, you're called back to duty and work and what have you. What was your next FMA stop?
Really what it became was I was in the military. If you go to any gym on any post, you're going to find guys doing martial arts. So I kind of became bastard son of many fathers as far as like being exposed to different martial arts. It was great because you could work out with somebody, kind of share, knowledge and share interest and stuff like that. But it wasn't a formal relationship. So you got to cherry pick a lot of stuff. But when Dan and Santos 6-volume series, his original series came out,
okay,
it was like, okay, here's the mother lode. This is, finally we've got access to, the real stuff. And I read the Filipino martial arts book, in addition to David Steele's mention, when the Filipino martial arts book came out, Dan Santos' book, that was really what sparked my interest the most. Still think it's one of those brilliant martial arts books ever written. And when you look at the logic of the book, I'm big on logic in everything I do. Being trained as an intelligence analyst and working that for more than 15 years, that's something that really resonated with me. And just when you look at the Filipino martial arts and the way that they approach things, it's a very logical concept-based approach. It's more of a tribal art than a martial art. Very outcome-based as far as functionality, and all of that really resonated with me. So when those videos came out, I just literally devoured those. I watched those over and over again, and did it with kind of the analytical process. What I like to do is I'll look at footwork first, I'll look at body mechanics second, I'll look at weapon hand position third, I'll look at live hand position fourth, and then you kind of put all the stuff together and kind of come out with it. So sometimes I'll watch stuff where I'll be watching a video and I'll literally mask off the top of the screen and just watch the feet and see what's going on.
Okay.
And being able to isolate the components, because the demonstration of the technique was awesome. The amount of actual instructional information in the videos was limited. So in a lot of cases, it really didn't take you step by step from, A to Z, but it was, incredible demonstration of skill. And it's like, okay, how do I distill something from this and make it instructional for me? So what you got to do is break it down into component parts. So I just kind of took that analytical approach, and that's what I did. And then looking at the conceptual aspect of the Filipino martial arts, where essentially the angles are all the same, the body mechanics are all the same. What you do is adapt to the attributes of the weapon. So steel seeks flesh, wood seeks bone. Impact weapons, you're trying to basically create crushing impact. With edge weapons, you're trying to cut tissue. So essentially looking at those mechanics and looking at the logic behind it, that's where I started to draw what became the basis of my knife technique from the stick technique.
Interesting. I like what that's kind of neat. If you're looking at a video, take it from that approach where you just mentioned there, like, okay, first look at the feet, then look at the area. Because sometimes you get caught up in looking at everything, and I guess it's fair to say you can miss out on certain things. But with your suggestion, isolating, like you said, the weapon hand, then the empty hand, then the upper body and the feet, that's neat. That's something I have to have to try out. I like that.
What's interesting is especially when when you have language barriers or I've
Mm.
done Filipino martial arts seminars with very accomplished Filipino martial artists who couldn't communicate very well in English. So what you have really is just your analytical ability and your observational ability. They're trying their best to try to convey information, but
Yeah.
you don't have a common language, or at least a high enough level of a common language
Right.
to make
Right.
that happen. So you don't have that. And in some cases, you'll have English speaking instructors who are just not great instructors and not really good communicators. They're good at mimicking what somebody else does. So you show them something and they can mimic that and do it perfectly. But when it comes to them serving as an instructor and trying to teach students who don't have that same innate skill, it doesn't work. So what you're trying to do is to learn despite your instructor's best efforts. And that's where learning how to observe, learning how to analyze, and then break it down into component parts becomes really critical.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I like that. I like that. I mean, with like one of the people I used to watch all the time, the old footage was Illustration, and I would definitely watch his feed, but I don't think I consciously went in there what you just described. You know what I mean? To be honest,
Yeah, because I mean, when you see it in totality, it's like, wow, that's magical. It's amazing what's going on. But trying to figure out, okay, what are the details? And especially when you look at something, when you look at camera work for martial arts videos, a lot of times that leaves a lot to be desired. So what you've got is essentially a two-dimensional representation of something where you don't have depth. You don't have the ability to relate left and right sides and everything else. You're looking at everything at a very flat perspective. So now you're trying to figure out from that, okay, when he steps, is he stepping forward? Is he stepping at an angle? What literally is going on? And now you're looking at the footwork by itself, you're looking at the tiniest little things. There could be a little scuff on the floor and you say, okay, that's my anchor point. When he steps, where is it in relation to that scuff on the floor? Is he stepping straight forward? Is he stepping to his right? And that becomes the analytical part of it.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Folks who are watching, that's some good advice there. So then, all right. So we got the reason. What made you obviously pursue FMA. So was the knife always kind of your focal interest? I mean, was that just
So when I first started learning the martial arts, learned a martial art called American Self-Protection, ASP, and it was basically a composite art, judo, savate, Western boxing, and Aikido. And it was supposed to be more of a hybrid type of thing. It was a great place to start. It was based on what I had accessible at the time. But when we got to the counter knife stuff in there, when we started doing defenses against knife attacks, it scared the shit out of me. I mean, that was the kind of stuff that was very, very frightening to me. And it was like, okay, this is something that I really want to focus on. So I talked to some of the other students and I said, hey, I really want to focus on this stuff. They're like, yeah, we do too. And we started turning up the heat, trying to make it a little bit more realistic, screwing with each other as far as our training, the intensity, and the techniques fell apart. They just didn't work very well. So I went to the instructor and I said, these techniques don't work. Is there something better? Is there something out there? And he said, if you want to learn how to defend against a weapon, learn how to use the weapon. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You learn its capabilities, its limitations, all that kind of stuff. And he was a former Army Ranger. So he said, okay, I'll teach you what I know of knife, which was pretty basic military stuff. And it really didn't further my knowledge very much, but it kind of sparked interest. Right around this time is when I found out about Soldier of Fortune magazine, Paladin Press, all that kind of stuff. So I started buying everything I could find.
Oh, okay.
So I went back to all the World War II manuals, went back to the World War I stuff. When you had the newer stuff come out, like Michael Echanis, his stuff in the late 70s, when that came out, I jumped on that. And literally I was buying up everything that I could, trying to figure out how to use the knife to go back to how to defend against the knife.
Yeah.
And it just became this constant process. Once I ended up a number of years later living overseas, it's like, okay, I can't carry a gun, let alone own a gun as a foreign national living overseas. The knife really became the go-to weapon. And especially I was traveling all throughout Asia at that point, going to some places that were kind of unsavory. And it's like, okay, I want to have the capability to carry a weapon. And that's where I really embraced using the knife as a defensive weapon, because that's all I had. It's interesting. People these days, when I teach self-defense, you have all the gun guys who will jump up and say, well, you just shoot them. And it's like, okay, you haven't lived in a society, you haven't lived in a country where you can't even own a gun.
Yeah, right. Let alone shoot somebody.
Right. So you got to change gears.
Yeah.
So that really fed my interest in using the knife and carrying the knife as a defensive weapon. And the two still go hand in hand as far as I'm concerned. Martial blade concepts and counter blade concepts, the empty hand defense against knife, those really I consider to be kind of two halves of one whole.
And it just something you touched on there, and we kind of touched it on during the test run. To me, this is something I've kind of mentioned before in previous podcasts with previous guests, is that, and I think the analogy I use is like, how do you defend against a tie kick if you don't understand the tie kick offense? And I told you, and now where the consequences are significantly much more expensive, it's like, why wouldn't you invest in understanding the offense? And I find that puzzling. What do you think is attributed to?
What's interesting is when you look at a lot of traditional martial arts, not FMA stuff, but in some cases, even FMA stuff, if you look at like Aikido knife defenses, what you have are very prescribed attacks. So they're going to have a lunging thrust, they're going to have the overhead cutting or stabbing attack, whatever it might be, but they're very, very rote attacks. And the techniques work best against those specific attacks. So when somebody doesn't attack you right, the techniques don't work really well. Yeah, so which is kind of bizarre, because if you're attacking somebody right, then if you stab them or cut them or whatever it might be, then you did a good job. You did it very well. Yeah. But literally, what it comes down to with a lot of martial arts is it has to be a prescribed attack. And when you look at the reality of how knife attacks happen, and that is inconsistent with the techniques that you're teaching,
oh my gosh,
it doesn't make for really good student retention or student happiness, because it's like, okay, this is the way people really attack with knives. What do we do about it? Well, attack me differently and I'll show you what we do. No, you can't redefine the problem to fit your solution. You have to be able to understand the problem. You have to understand the nature of it clearly and with brutal honesty, and then say, okay, based on that, what do I have? And that part of it becomes a much less clinical, much less, neat and tidy solution. And it's like, well, I might get hurt. Yeah, absolutely. He's got a knife, you don't.
Yeah.
Reality check.
It's funny though, but I see some FMA systems though that don't, for instance, don't deal with the common attacks, whether the sewing machine, they deal with the reverse grip overhand. I've seen enough of that. That's covered. But like the sewing machine, for instance, it's like they'll give you all angle ones, 5, 6, whatever. I mean, a whole 12 count and all that. But and that to me, for current status quo, with all the evidence on YouTube and you see in the most common attacks, like, why is that not so addressed within FMA today? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think what it comes down to, and not to bust on any system or anything like that.
No.
We're trying to be as objective as possible. What it comes down to, though, is people study martial arts for different reasons. And some people are perfectly content to study a martial art as a physical culture type of thing, where they say, okay, cool, I'm getting exercise, I'm learning about a different culture, I'm doing cool stuff that's fun to do. And, it's self-defense-y, but really it's more of a physical culture. And they're content to kind of suspend reality a little bit to be able to do that stuff. They're developing skill. The skill is not the most practical approach to self-defense. It's not necessarily the most reliable approach to self-defense, but it's fun to do. And it's again, when you look at the cultural side, it's just like the people who are they like getting decked out in all the, the traditional garb and the uniforms and all that kind of stuff. Just being able to, really look the part of a, traditional Filipino martial artist or a traditional Japanese martial artist or whatever it might be, because they're studying it with a different mindset. And in many cases, they're not consciously thinking about why they're studying it. They may think they're learning self-defense, and they've never really just held it up to a hard standard of logic and say, okay, is somebody really going to attack me this way? Is somebody going to attack me with a big knife that I can easily strip and do all my cool FMA stuff with? Is that the way stuff really happens? And if they see a real knife attack and they look at that and say, wait a minute, that's scary, and it's not like what I do in class, blinders go on. They're going to look
No,
at,
I know, no.
I need to do more of this stuff. I don't want to see that reality over
I
there.
know. It's like it doesn't
Don't pop
exist.
my
It doesn't
bubble.
exist.
I don't like
I
that.
know. Seeing that, it's like I don't know if it's conscious or subconscious. But no, I'm not gonna look over there. No.
I think there's a lot of willful disbelief. A lot of people will do stuff and they don't want, especially once. One of the most frustrating things that I see is I'll have people come to NBC classes and they'll be like, okay, start getting into everything. And it's like, well, in our system, we do this, in our system, we do this. And it's like, okay, with all due respect, that's great. This is why we don't do that. This is why we don't do that. And we start pointing out kind of the shortcomings of all that. And you can see them just get really uncomfortable. And ultimately, if they're honest about it, what they'll say is, I spent all this time getting really good at all this stuff. And you're basically telling me that it's not relevant to the threats that I'm actually going to face on the street.
Real face, yeah.
I'm sorry, it's true. I'd rather have you learn that in the gym than on the street.
Sure.
And again, it becomes one of these things. Once you've invested so much time getting good at something, you don't want to think that you've wasted that time. You don't want to think, hey, I was pissing up a rope trying to learn skill, and it didn't work.
I think you hit on something though, and I've alluded to this before. I think that people have that, regardless of the system, wherever it's FMA or not, but they put so many years and they got all the accolades and the certificates. I think the more they're vested in the emotional subjective attachments, I think it's hard for them to leave it or to, you know what I mean? Like, no, I mean, I think
it's human nature. Hard. I mean, we get attached to things, and when you're comfortable with something and you have that comfort zone with whatever, I mean, it could be as simple as, hey, you're getting a new phone. Well, my old phone worked this way, and now I got this new phone, and I don't know how to use it yet. You're uncomfortable for a while, and it takes you out of that comfort zone. And it's like, I want to go back to my old phone because I knew how to do that, but now I don't. And that's human nature, I think. And again, it's not bad unless your defined goal is to learn self-defense. So if that's what you want to learn, then what you have to do is you have to stay rooted in reality. And the idea of, I call it the martial arts weeds. You need to know when you're in the weeds. And if you're drifting off and it's like the weeds are getting taller and taller and suddenly you can't see anything anymore, it's like, okay, I'm doing really fun physical culture stuff and I enjoy the hell out of it. But you know what, if I were really attacked and I tried to do this against a guy, trying to cut me with a box cutter, it's not going to work.
I know. Right. I mean, right. Like you mentioned before, I mean, it's all trained with these, not bolo, but like Bowie knife length type things and all that. When really, I mean, like what happened to the 3-inch, the 4-inch, the box cutter,
Right. The steak knife, kitchen knife, whatever it might be, whatever you can pick up,
Yeah. It's, train it off. I mean, for sure. No, this is great stuff. I just feel for those people that experience that difficulty. Like they know what's there. You know what I mean? Like they know what's there and it works, and they know what they're doing is that, but they're just that reluctancy to leave, and you know what I mean? And
I kind of look at it. It's almost like if you're training in Iaido or Kenjutsu or anything like that. Again, the physical skills associated with those arts are very impressive. But they're anachronistic as far as self-defense goes. You're not going to carry a katana around. You're not going to have somebody attack you with a katana so that you can do your technique.
Right.
But again, from a cultural standpoint, from a physical endeavor, it's awesome stuff. It's just not relevant to current needs. It was relevant hundreds of years ago if you lived in Japan and you were part of the samurai.
Right.
It's the same thing when you look at a lot of the FMA stuff. If you look at it, you say, okay, if I were a Filipino tribesman and, the Spaniards were coming over the hill and we had to defend our village, what would we do? A lot of the stuff would have been appropriate. If you look at it, even in the context of, World War II, the, Bolo battalions and everything else out there against, the Japanese. Sure. Again, you put it in a battlefield context, there may be good application to that. But when it comes to self-defense, the other aspect of that too is that when you look at the battlefield applications and then you try to take that and apply that to modern self-defense and the responsibility of legally justifiable self-defense, two very different things. So
Yeah.
that's another aspect of FMA as a basis for self-defense skill that's kind of inconsistent with modern Western culture.
Matter of fact, which incidentally is kind of what was my next area to go into with you, which we kind of touched upon in the test run, and that was legality, cultural, which you just kind of alluded to with regards to self-defense ramifications, modern day times. So you were just kind of touching on it, like what else could we, what else can you speak on that for the viewers?
Well, it's, if you think of like a traditional FMA counter knife technique, so
Mm-hmm.
you'll see like somebody coming low angle 5. You're going to do like an X block type of thing. You do an outside wrist lock. You strip the knife, and the first thing you do after you strip the knife is you drive it into his neck.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you'll see that over and over and over again. A lot of different systems will have their own flavor of it, whatever it might be. As soon as you take that knife out of his hand and you use it against him, you've gone from justifiable self-defense to the disarm to assault with a deadly weapon to attempted murder to potentially murder. And I mean, literally, the old saying, you're going to fight the way you train. Well, if you train to do something that is completely inconsistent with modern self-defense law, you may sit back there and say, well, that guy deserved it. He probably did. If you look at him as, if he's a criminal, career criminal, whatever it might be, cleansing the gene pool of somebody who's a violent criminal, is that a good thing? You can argue that any way you want, but
right.
Off the street, people would be safer, right? But in doing that, the problem is modern self-defense, we're held to a super high standard. And as soon as you've stopped the threat, as soon as you're in a situation where there's no longer a threat of death or grievous bodily injury, you can't use lethal force anymore.
Right.
So when you train to specifically disarm somebody and then use lethal force against them, you're painting yourself into a big corner.
No, you're the one that's gonna be tried. I mean, yeah. I mean, but does it change though? Yeah, I guess so. My question to you is based on setting, and I guess what I mean by that is they break into your house. In other words, versus you're in a Walmart parking lot, the guy holds you up, and like you just said, you disarm, and now you're returning the sender into his C artery, or something like that. But within the context of somebody break into my house, does that change, or
it can? So that's what that does is, again, looking at self-defense. If that's your goal, if you're saying I'm going to learn FMA and I'm going to do self-defense, I'm going to draw self-defense skills from that and self-defense abilities. Now what you have to do is look at self-defense law. So the legal aspect of that, I did the Best Defense TV series for 11 years, and everything that we did, every episode in that series, we had essentially the overarching legal component. Are we doing anything that is going to misinform people so that they might do something that is not legally defensible? So we focus on this a lot. And what it comes down to is, if you look at like Colorado, we have castle doctrine. Okay, so if somebody breaks into your house, basically once they've crossed that threshold, at that point, you can pretty much consider them to be a lethal threat. Not every state is like that. So if you look at more liberal states, their laws are going to reflect that.
Yeah.
And what you end up with is, a very, very different situation from place to place. What you also look at, I always say the operative part of the term self-defense is self. So, if you are 30 years old, able-bodied, strong, fit, all that kind of stuff, you're going to be held to a different standard, because people are going to look at that and say, you know what, you're pretty capable. You can take care of yourself. Yeah. You're good to go. Okay. So your response threshold as far as resorting to a weapon or something like that is going to be a lot higher. Then you take the same person 30 years later, 2 hip replacements, whatever else it might be, and it's like, okay, now you've got a 60-year-old person who's got much lower physical attributes, is not nearly as physically capable. So his threshold to say, you know what, I was in fear for my life or in fear of grievous bodily injury, that's a lot lower because he's less physically capable.
Correct, right.
And that the problem is all of that stuff, it's all real. It's all really complicated. It's all really scary, but it's all really binding when it comes to the legal aspects.
Yeah. I mean, right. Like I tell my students, and it's come on the show before, with different guests, really knowing your laws within the state, as far as like what you can do and as far as the laws are concerned, based on, is it in your home or is it in a public setting, and, what have you, it's, Yeah,
Being
absolutely
a
very
good guy is
valuable.
hard work. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. Like I know, and like you mentioned, like Connecticut is a very liberal state. So, I think there's like they actually have to be like enter your house. Like, you be at the doorway and they can, you know, curse you
Right.
out, say whatever underneath the
And even then,
sun.
some states will have a duty to retreat. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of different stuff. You literally getting into the legal aspects of self-defense is a very complicated thing.
Mm.
But there's good resources out there. Andrew Branca's stuff, The Law of Self-Defense, his book is awesome. Um, there's good information out there. All the stuff that
Mm.
Maestro has done over the years, it's well worth your
Yeah,
effort
yeah,
to look
definitely.
into that stuff and become familiar with that. And again, what you need to do, it's just like if your goal is self-defense, and let's say you're learning a traditional FMA technique, and you say, you know what, this really doesn't fit modern needs as far as what I might be up
Mm.
against, or you know what, the application of this technique is not legally defensible. You need to learn when to draw the line, or at least when to mentally say, you know what, I'm doing something that is inconsistent with what I'd want to do if I was actually defending my life.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's another perspective to look at it. Sure. Um, I have a question here from Matt, and you kind of already sort of answered it. I mean, of course this would be based on state, I'm assuming, but his example was, is deadly force permissible if you cut somebody's tendon and it's not stopping the attacker? I mean, the attacker is still coming at you to really impose bodily harm on you, and all that. But I think what you said, I think it's going to vary, right? I mean,
Well, what it comes down to, the key word in that entire sentence was stop.
mm,
Okay, so once you stop somebody, okay, so it could be as simple as, the guy takes a swing at you with a tire iron, whatever it is, you end up popping your knife, and you back off, issue verbal commands, and he's like, okay, I'm done, I don't want to fight. And at that point you say, you know what, I'm going after him. This
uh,
guy deserves it. You just became the aggressor because you stopped the attack through
right.
the defensive display of a weapon, through the confidence to be able to use it, through verbal commands and everything else. You
Mm,
stopped the attack. You didn't follow through. So at that point, if you decide to engage, everything starts over again. And at that point, it either becomes mutual combat or you become the aggressor. When
right.
it comes to stopping, when you're using the knife, the idea is whatever you can do to make him physically incapable of causing you harm.
Mm,
That's really what it comes down to. So if you go beyond the psychological aspect of stopping, either he chooses not to fight anymore,
mm,
uh, or he continues to fight. If he's continuing to fight, then what you have to do is make him physically incapable of trying to kill you.
yeah, right.
So that comes down to an understanding of human anatomy, the
Yeah,
destructive
right. Where to
quality of
go?
the
And,
knife you
yeah.
carry, and that's where you get into the details of NBC and why NBC is what it is. So a
Okay.
lot of people will be like, well, what if I cut his tendon and it doesn't work? Then you cut something else that will
Yeah,
work.
so he stopped him from killing you. Yeah.
That's why we have complete techniques. We also
Yeah.
practice if your first movement, if the first thing I do, he swings that tire iron, I do a cruzada, I cut his flexor tendons of the bone, his hand opens up, he drops the
Right.
tire iron, and he grabs his wrist, I'm done. So
Yeah.
even though
Right.
there's more movement to that technique, I can't say, well, shit, I'm not done yet. Let me cut you a few more times because my
Yeah.
instructor
Wait, I was just
disappointed
getting
with the
started.
you can't do that. You've got to stop at that point because you have stopped the threat.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely, absolutely. Which what a thing that I train a lot just because I mean, because it's probably what I'm going to see out there. God forbid if something happened to me besides an empty hand attack. Empty hand against knife, one of the most difficult things
Mhm.
to do,
Absolutely.
and I buy into 2-on-1, trying to control that limb. What's your take?
Absolutely. Yeah. 2-on-1 is the best way to go. You want to
Okay,
not only 2-on-1, but structure versus strength.
okay,
So what you want to look at is creating a solid skeletal structure to be able to control the limb and limit its mobility to the shoulder joint. That's what
mm,
allows you to actually achieve decisive control.
okay. Do you prefer like what they construe as Russian time? I prefer always having the arm on the outside when you can. I mean, in a perfect world, what do you advocate?
So
Like,
in counterblade concept CBC, what we focus on is what's called a compression lock. So a compression lock is essentially it's Mechanically, it feels like an arm bar, but a lot worse. Okay, so what we're doing is controlling the limb. What we've got is essentially, if you imagine the arm in front of me this way,
Yeah.
my ulna of my right hand would be on top of the tricep.
Okay.
My left arm would be underneath, my hands would be clasped together, and everything would be pulled in
I
tight.
did see the video when you're entering like this, and then I did see that, and then you end up joining your hands together, and okay.
Yeah, because what it does is, first of all, and it's one of the other things when you learn martial arts, when you get good at martial arts, you understand what muscles you're trying to activate. When you do this technique properly, what I tell people is pull your elbows in tight to your ribs. What that does is, whether they realize it or not, they're activating their lats. So a lot of people will try to do it and they're using their biceps, but now what you have is a small muscle that's not as strong. And also what you're doing is you're bending your arms, which doesn't allow you to apply pressure downward. So when you use the proper muscles, you're pulling your elbows in tight and then getting your forearms parallel to the ground. So now you've got that good solid control. And what you've also done is you've shortened the leverage on all of your limbs. You've pulled everything in tight. The more you extend your arms, the more that leverage can be used against you, the more wiggle room he has. The tighter it is to you, the more control you have, and the more you can use body weight.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, man, just emptying against a knife. It's another arena where we touched on a few paragraphs or so back is I think there's a lot of FMA people that see stuff like what you do, or the really embracing the 2-on-1, more combative orientation, and they'll see some success people are having it, but they're still, I don't know, like that reluctancy to just adapt. I don't know. I mean, am I off point here, or what do you think?
Again, I think a lot of people are enamored with the Filipino martial arts, and they see them as fascinating, as interesting. Again, whatever reason, whether they've actually quantified that reason in their heads or not, to say, why am I doing this? I think they just enjoy it, but they haven't held it to a high standard of logic. So they keep doing it, and essentially it's like, okay, this is fun, this is cool. And even if they get to that point where they've kind of got that little question mark pops up in their head, it's like, would this really work or not? Again, they're afraid to really hold it up to hard logic. Whereas the combative community is, we're going to pressure test everything, and you have kind of that other extreme. I think there's a very happy medium in between, where you look at the reality of the threats you face. You train with a skill-based approach, which the Filipino martial arts provide an awesome platform for that, and you meet in the middle on those two, so that you can still get good repetitive training. You can get good intense training that has scalable intensity, rather than just going balls out and beating the snot out of each other.
Yeah. I tell you, it can be a puzzling community, man. You know what I mean? I guess like others, you know what I mean? I mean, like others. Yeah, I mean, but it's
and everyone has different goals, whether they quantify them and articulate them or not, or whether it's something that just swims around in their own heads and their own hearts. Whatever the reason is that they're doing something, it makes sense to them.
Right. And I guess
it's well reasoned. In other cases, it's more emotional.
Yeah, if it puts a smile on their face, I guess you can argue that. All right, so we're gonna get to like the bigger here. So, what for folks who might not be familiar, or maybe heard the term or the abbreviation and all that, what is MBC and how did it come about?
So MBC is Martial Blade Concepts. It originally was Martial Blade Craft. So when you go back, I first met Sal Glesser, who's the founder of Syderco, back in 1994. And I started writing for knife magazines back in 92. Sal kind of knew of me as a knife writer. I'd written a few things about Syderco products. I met him, and we just knew each other casually. Never really did much with him or anything. He went to Jim Keating's Riddle of Steel in, I believe it was 99. And that really was kind of a big changing point for him. Sal he'd done martial arts throughout his life. He grew up in New York City and had always carried a knife, was kind of a tough street kid and everything. And when he came back from that, he wanted to create a training program through Syderco.
Okay.
And when he was there, he trained with a guy named Bert Locke, who was also living here in Colorado. So he went to Bert and he said, hey, I want to set up a training thing here in Colorado. So they set up, it was a small training room behind their factory outlet store back at that time. Bert was basically running that. And when Bert decided he was going to leave Colorado and move up to Montana, Sal asked him, it's like, hey, I need somebody to kind of take over that program, somebody local here that might be able to run with it. And I'd met Bert. He was an uke, meat puppet for a video that I'd done with Jim Keating, and he helped out with that. And Bert got to know me, got to know kind of my approach to knife stuff at that time, because I was running Paladin Press's video production department during that time. And he said, hey, you should talk to Mike Janich. So Sal basically contacted me, and during that time, basically the Marshall Blade Craft program, it was a phrase that Sal coined. He didn't want to have it be knife fighting or anything like that. He wanted to come up with kind of a pseudonym for knife fighting or knife skills. So the Marshall Blade Craft program was a term that he had established. And basically there were two of us that were designing at that time. There's myself and Bram Frank, who were both designing knives for Syderco that were based on our martial arts experience. So we both taught seminars under the NBC banner for a while. I think ultimately, for whatever reason, Syderco decided, probably because I was local here, that it was easier to maintain the program with me teaching primarily for it. So I taught for them from 99 until 2004. Yeah. And at that point, I got a job offer from Blackhawk Products Group and was basically going to manage their knife companies and become a competitor at Syderco. So I went to Sal and I said, I've got this great opportunity. I want to work in the knife industry. I'm going to leave Paladin and go to work for Blackhawk. I want to, remain friends, but I can't teach for you and work for a competitor. It's a conflict of interest. And Sal was very cool about it. He's like, absolutely no problem. And by that time, NBC had it become an acronym. People were familiar with it. We used it as shorthand for what we were doing. It's like, we're doing NBC. Okay. And the concept part of it, the conceptual part of it, started to resonate. I worked a bunch with Joe Simonet, his C-Lot concepts, key fighting concepts. So the idea of a conceptually based martial art made sense to me. So I basically said, hey, Sal, how about if I take NBC and make it Martial Blade Concepts? You keep Martial Blade Craft, and that way it remains your proprietary term. You keep that, I'll take mine, and that way we still both enjoy the acronym. And he was perfectly agreeable with that, and that's the way it's gone ever since. So that's essentially how Martial Blade Concepts came to be from an evolutionary standpoint. As far as what it is, it's basically taking proven concepts, training methodologies, drills, essentially the mechanics of the Filipino martial arts based on my analysis of those arts, and expressing those in a way that is consistent with the needs of modern self-defense. So focusing on stopping power and also focusing on understanding human anatomy and the vulnerabilities of human anatomy based on the knives we actually carry. Okay. So, like I said before, logic is I try to apply logic in everything I do. So when you look at the logic of NBC, basically you're going to fight with the knife you actually carry. So whatever you have in your pocket versus the Bowie knife that you like.
Right. You're just training it, right?
Whatever it might be, whatever is a cool knife, that's one thing. Whatever you actually have in your pocket, you're going to fight with. So you'll fight with the knife you actually carry. You have to quantify and understand the destructive capacity of that knife. You have to understand that stopping power is the key of all real self-defense. So what you have to then do is take the destructive capacity of your knife, translate that to the human body, and figure out, based on a realistic scientific and medical understanding of human anatomy, based on what kind of damage you can cause, how can you force somebody to stop instantly and reliably? Okay. That's basically what NBC is.
Wow. That's and Jay has some questions in regards to that, and
he's just a troublemaker, so I wouldn't listen to him.
Yeah, I know. We're gonna have to address that with him later. Yeah,
that's a whole program by itself.
That's a separate module right there.
Exactly.
Keeping Jay in check. What specific persons that you were influenced by while you were developing NBC is his question.
So for me, the biggest influence, again, going back to the very start, excuse me, David Steele, although he wasn't really an instructor, the fact that he was sharing information about knife tactics way back when kind of whet my appetite for that. Michael Achanis, even though didn't really agree with his approach to knife tactics, still, again, the idea of sharing information openly and giving people a source of something to work with. When I really got into, especially working for Paladin, working with James Keating, Kelly Warden, produced videos with Bram Frank as well, was exposed to his approach. Joseph Simonet. There were a number of people, especially when you go back and you look back in the day, James Keating and Kelly Warden in the early 90s, they were writing for Full Contact Magazine, they were writing for Fighting Knives Magazine, and they were really some of the first ones to share knife tactics openly and to really try to kind of democratize that and take it out of the mysticism and the secrecy that kind of shrouded it for a long time.
Okay, well, and he's got a on that by developing. Okay, and all right. So now with Spider, let's kind of you kind of touched on it. Your Syderco, because you're still affiliated with them and working for them. We kind of found out how you got affiliated with them, but what's status quo? What's your role there? Because from Blackhawk you went back there. I mean,
yeah. So I never worked for Syderco formally back in the day. So when I was teaching for them, it was done basically just on a handshake basis. We didn't even have a written contract or anything like that. Sal basically said, "Hey, would you teach for us?" And we did that, maintained that for a number of years, and had a great relationship throughout that entire time. When I went to work for Blackhawk, to backtrack a little bit, in 1997, I got a call from James Keating, and he was part of a thing called the Masters of Defense project. It was basically 5 knife designers that were essentially experts as far as knife tactics or edge weapon tactics that were supposed to design knives for this company called Masters of Defense. I became the 5th. So it was James Keating, Graciela Casillas Boggs, Jim Patches Watson, Mas Ayub, and myself. So got involved in that. That was the first commercial knife design that I had done. And shortly after that, Gunsight Academy, they were interested in doing an edge weapon symposium. And I had met Richard G., who was in charge of Gunsight at that time. He said, "Hey, we're trying to put this event together. I've heard about your curriculum and everything. I really am interested in it. I'd like to have you teach for us. Can you send me an outline?" And I'd never really committed everything that I was doing in training into a written outline. So gave that to him. That became kind of the guts of what became the Martial Blade concept program that I taught for Syderco. And then when I went to work for Blackhawk, basically took over MOD, was running Masters of Defense, and set up a second brand called Blackhawk Blades. So was still teaching MBC during that time, running both of those knife companies, designing knives for both Blackhawk and Masters of Defense. And what I didn't realize at that time was that the founder of Blackhawk was setting the company up to be sold. So essentially, they were trying to create a very impressive financial profile that made them attractive to ATK, which is the company that bought them. One of the ways they did that was they got everything running smoothly, and then they gutted their middle management and kicked a lot of people like me to the curb. And in doing so, suddenly profits soared because they didn't have our salaries and benefits to deal with anymore. And I was basically left looking for a job. So I reached out to Sal at Syderco, and he says, I'm kind of semi-retired. My son Eric is running the business now. You should talk to him. So I spoke to Eric, and I basically said, hey, I'm looking for an opportunity. I've been involved in the cutlery industry for quite some time. I've been a friend of Syderco and an associate of Syderco, for more than 10 years. Would you be interested in, considering me for employment with Syderco? So they brought me in for a job interview, and we sat down. They said, "What do you think you could bring to the table as far as Syderco is concerned?" So I have good writing skills. I had video production skills. I had photography skills. Had a number of things, and I basically have done analysis of Syderco's status at that point, their catalog, their advertising, their marketing efforts, and everything else. And I said, I think I could help in these areas. And fortunately, they extended an opportunity to me, created a position for me. So I'm the special projects coordinator for Syderco. It's a purposely ambiguous term, which means that I do lots of stuff. And if they think
you do a lot under. So this is just trying the transition. What year about?
This is 2009.
So okay, so you've been with them ever since. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. And so with the title you got, I mean, so it sounds like you're doing a little of everything for them. I mean,
yeah. So I work for the director of sales and marketing. So I do a lot of the marketing stuff. So when it comes to catalog copy, I write all the copy for Syderco's printed catalog. Every Syderco product, every new knife at least, we're backtracking to some of the older stuff, comes with what's called a product information guide. It's a little pamphlet that basically describes the history of the knife. It was designed by a specific designer, tells a bit about that person's history. So I generate all the copy for those, do a lot of the photography for those as well, do the graphic layout for those. I do a lot of the art photography for the when we make exclusive knives, we do exclusives that are kind of special configurations of knives for different dealers. I do all the art photography for the exclusives. I also represent Syderco at trade shows, specifically military and law enforcement trade shows, as well as major trade events like the Blade Show and SHOT Show. And stuff like that. Okay. Yeah. I do design work for them. So I've designed several knives for Syderco since I came on with them full time. I'm also a member of the R&D team. So whenever they're working on specific projects, if they're trying to solve a particular R&D or engineering aspect of whatever that design might be, I'm involved in that process as well. So a little bit of everything.
Well, you get to travel around though. I mean, that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I'm very fortunate to be able to travel and represent Syderco. So
yeah, and then you get to see your other
now
buddies.
that COVID is calming down a bit, we're getting back on the road. So I'll be doing several military trade shows over the next few months.
One person, you kind of touched on his name, but one person wanted to know kind of more specifically how you and James Keating became friends, and you know how that come about.
So I was living in Bangkok at the time. So I was working for the Department of Defense as a Vietnamese linguist and intelligence officer for an organization that was looking for POWs and MIAs in Vietnam. So I was stationed at the embassy in Bangkok and traveling all throughout Asia during that time, also doing on-site investigations in Vietnam and Laos. And was subscribed to Fighting Knives magazine. So every time the printed magazine came out, you know, and across, it's like awesome. You know, I had something to sit down and went through it cover to cover. And I saw an ad for Jim Keating's Knifecraft series, initially volumes 1 and 2. Then he added volume 3 after that. I'd read a number of his articles in Fighting Knives magazine. And it's like, you know, this is awesome. This guy is democratizing knife skills. He's teaching stuff. He's articulate, smart guy. I want to see what he has to offer. So back then, this was all, you know, pre-internet, pre-PayPal, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Had to like fill out a form or write a letter to somebody and put it in the mail and say, I want to order this. So, you know, I sent him a personal check and it's like, hey, you know, this is who I am. I want to order your stuff. He freaked because he's like, hey, there's a guy in Bangkok at the embassy who's ordering my videos. He sent me back he has beautiful handwriting. He's a really accomplished calligrapher, and he wrote back a handwritten letter to me. And he's like, hey, if you ever, you know, have any questions or anything, I'm really honored that you would order my videos. Here you go. If you ever have any questions, write me back. And again, this is all before email.
Yeah.
Went through his videos and everything, drew from them what I could, and I had some questions. So I wrote him back, and we started corresponding back and forth. During that time, he also was friends with Bob Taylor, and Bob Taylor was very close with the Lao community, especially the Hmong community. And he had gone through what's called the Bachi ceremony. And Jim Keating had gone through the ceremony. It's basically a friendship ceremony. They have these little string bracelets they tie on your wrist, and they're basically symbolic symbols of friendship with people in a group. And Jim had gone through this, and he was unfamiliar with the cultural aspects of it. So he wrote me back, and he's like, "What is this thing? Is this some kind of voodoo thing, or what's going on here?
Yeah.
What did I get myself into?" So I explained that to him, and we just had a really nice correspondence going back and forth in the early '90s. And then when I decided I was going to leave government service and pursued the job of Paladin Press, I met him at the first Soldier of Fortune convention I went to back in '94. And when I met him there, we instantly hit it off and have been friends ever since.
Wow. I mean, because I'm trying to get him on, man, but it's been tough. I mean, James Keating, it's been tough. You know what I mean? It's just
Jim's a pretty close hold guy. He just the whole idea of he's not a very public person, and I think there's a lot of there was a lot of misunderstanding about who Jim was and all that type of thing back in the day, and he just got tired of it. Where he's at now, he's like, the people who appreciate me. The people who are interested in and are willing to look at what information I have to offer. Those are the people that I want to spend time with, and I don't think he does it maliciously or anything like that. He just
yeah. I mean, when I did talk to him on the phone and some of the emails that we exchanged back and forth, I mean, very pleasant. I mean, very, I mean, absolutely. I just hope it materializes getting him on here.
He's a wealth of information. I mean, his knowledge of esoteric stuff and just some of the wildest stuff you'd never think. It's like, where did you get that information? And I mean, he's just an amazing historian. He digs deep into everything he does, and it's a fascinating guy. But he's always been. I've never had the chance to spend a whole lot of time with him, but the time that I have spent with him has always just been awesome. And we still, we talk every few months. We'll get on the phone and just get together and chat for a few hours. But he's awesome.
No, you see, I mean, when I did talk about time, it was amazing. Just some of the stuff he was divulging. Incredible. So what kind of led to your inspiration of knife making? Like, what was what led to it?
Basically, once I started looking at creating the logic of NBC, again, what it came down to is like, if I could only carry, like in Colorado, 3.5-inch blade. Okay, if I've only got 3.5 inches of blade to work with, what kind of damage can I cause? How do I translate that to the human body? And in the process, what blade configurations work best? So when I designed my first knife for Masters of Defense, it was called the Tempest. It was a Bowie style profile. And, I learned from all of my research. One of my mentors was Colonel Rex Applegate. Colonel Applegate was like, you want to have belly to the blade so that it slashes better. And it's like, okay, so I was repeating what I thought I knew based on what I'd heard from everybody else. When I had a chance to design another knife, it was actually for a custom knife maker named Mike Snowdy. I said, you know what, I'm going to go back to the drawing board. And what I'd started doing in the classes I was teaching, I created a thing called Porkman. So basically, you take a wooden dowel, you take about a 5-pound pork tenderloin, you butterfly it, you slit it down the middle, wrap it around the dowel, tie it on with a bunch of twine, and then wrap it with about 30 layers of saran wrap, and then tape the ends. So what you got is something that represents kind of like the size of a human leg or upper arm or whatever else it might be. And it replicates a human limb. The only thing it doesn't have is blood pressure.
Gotcha.
And started doing cutting tests. So I took out all the knives in my collection, bought a bunch of pork, fired up the grill, and, cut up a target, take note of what I had, throw the meat on the grill, make another one, do it again. And basically what I found was a lot of the stuff that I thought I knew wasn't really holding true. What I learned was that when you have belly to an edge, meaning that you have an upward curve of that edge, since your arm moves at an arc, if the arc of motion of your arm and the curve of the edge run parallel, you're not cutting any deeper. So you're not applying pressure into the cut. And when I would do this stuff, I try to do it as scientifically as possible. I do a cut and then I measure the depth of the cut and see what kind of results I got. And what I found was blades that had lots of belly to them really didn't cut very well. Blades that had straighter edges did.
Interesting. Okay.
So
Okay.
what it did was it really kind of turned me on to what's called the Wharncliffe blade design. It goes back to the early 18th century or early 19th century. When you go back even farther, it was basically the blade shape of a scramisax axe. You'll see it in, throughout history in various edge weapon cultures. But basically what I found, so perfect example here, trainer for Syderco Yojimbo too. When you're applying pressure, here I'm applying pressure, applying pressure, applying pressure. There's no point along that cut, if I'm using the full length of the edge, where it dissipates the force of the cut
Gotcha.
because
Yeah.
the edge curves away. I'm always cutting deeper. If you contrast that with something that has an upward curve to it, now I'm applying pressure, but the arc of motion of my arm and this curve are now running parallel. So I'm not cutting any deeper. Even though I have a nice long cut, there's not much pressure that's going deeper into the tissue. And that's especially true when you think about the compressibility of tissue. If you want to cut deep, you have to take into consideration that it compresses, and you're going to have to go deeper and deeper as you go, as the tissue yields and lets you cut deeper.
Okay. Okay.
So what that led to was being able to design stuff that I thought worked better. And I designed the first knife for Masters of Defense. Again, I based it on what I thought I knew. As I learned more, as I did more testing, did more empirical stuff, that led me to do other designs. And that's what led to essentially in many ways, pioneering the tactical Wharncliffe. So starting with Snowdy designs, that design, the original Ronin was adopted by Syderco. They produced that. That became the original Yojimbo. And then it just kind of flowed from there.
Wow. Wow. And then, and this is a question from somebody too in relation. So he wants, as far as if you ever, well, one, how did you develop a relation with Fred Perrin, and did you ever co-design knives with him?
Yes. So Fred is awesome. Fred is a really great guy, good friend. And when I designed the original Ronin design, fixed blade Wharncliffe design, Fred was already designing for Syderco at the time. And he was curious about that design because he was also a historian, still is, and understood, hey, it looks like a little scramisax. So what he did was he requested a sample from Syderco. They sent it to him. And at that time, Fred was still kind of self-conscious about his English. And there was a friend of his that goes by the name Nemo. And he said, Nemo, I want you to send an email to Mike Janich. I want you to contact him. And I want you to explain my thoughts about his knife design. He really liked it. He did his own live blade cutting with it. He tested it out, really enjoyed the design. He had seen some of the stuff that I had done as far as books and videos, and basically wanted to establish contact. So he reached out through his friend Nemo. Nemo contacted me. I'm like, wow, Fred Perrin. I knew of him a little bit from his Syderco designs, but really didn't know a whole lot about him. But we started corresponding through Nemo, and essentially kind of got to know each other. And then eventually, a number of years later, we ended up at the same trade show together. I was actually working with Blackhawk at the time, and I was at the it was a police show in Paris, Millipol, a military police show in Paris. And that was the first time that I met Fred in person. And we hit it off immediately. And since then, he's had me teach in Paris probably about 4 or 5 times. We've co-taught together in Germany. I've had him come. He's been to my martial blade camp and taught seminars for my private students. We stay in pretty close contact with each other. And the knife that we've designed together is called the Fusion. So basically what it was, one of my favorite neck knife designs was his neck buoy. And I'd written a couple of articles about it, sung its praises and everything. And Fred's like, oh, you like my neck buoy? And I'm like, yeah, I really like it a lot. And he's like, you like it, but it has upward curving edge. And I'm like, yeah, make an exception for that one because it's such a cool flat knife. And he's like, how would you feel about that knife being a Wharncliffe? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I could be convinced. So basically we worked together, worked out a Wharncliffe version of his neck buoy, and that became the Fusion.
Oh, wow. Wow. So, and you guys still talk and what?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've been to Fred's house in France, visited him there, stayed at his house, visited his shop. Again, I've taught. He teaches out of a traditional Japanese dojo, actually, in Paris. So he's brought me to Paris, I want to say 4 times before COVID hit and threw everything off. number of times. We co-taught together in Friedrichshafen, Germany. So we co-taught a seminar there. So yeah, we're good friends. It's cool because like visiting his house, I looked at his library. He came to my house, looked at my library, and it's like we're like same son from different mothers, you know. Everything was like
yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Jeez. So next we'll get to the Paladin Press. How'd you become involved, and what were your notable projects there?
So I became a Paladin customer back in the mid 70s. I was like 12 or 13 years old, and it was like, okay, I want to learn about knife fighting. So I bought Soldier of Fortune magazine, saw a full page ad for Paladin Press. One of the books in there was a complete book of knife fighting. Ordered that, got on their mailing list, and just became a Paladin customer. Fast forward to when I was living in Bangkok, one of the things that had always fascinated me was blowguns. And I could never find a book on blowguns. So living in Asia, traveling to Malaysia, traveling to, you know, the Philippines, collecting some of the traditional ones, I had a bunch of different blowguns, and I probably, at that point, I thought knew more about blowguns than most people did. And it was time to write my first book. So I reached out to Paladin. I said, you know, hey, I can't find any books that are dedicated to blowguns out there. I'm interested in writing a book. Wrote my 2 sample chapters, sent it in. They approved it. That got published as Blowguns, The Breath of Death. That started my relationship as an author with Paladin, and ended up writing a number of books for them over the years. When I got to the point where I was kind of fed up with working for the government, was looking for another opportunity. This was 1994. Reached out to Paladin kind of whimsically and sent them a resume and a cover letter. And I said, you know, hey, I've been a customer of yours for a long time. I became an author of yours. And I have good background knowledge in a lot of the specialized topics that you deal with. Would you be interested in considering me for, you know, some kind of employment? The phrase actually in my cover letter that got me the interview, I was living in Hawaii at the time, second time, and I'd written in the cover letter, I said that I'd written for audiences ranging from coworkers to members of the National Security Council, and in styles ranging from meticulously detailed to contemptuously ambiguous. And that was the phrase that Peter Lund, the founder of Paladin, he read that and he's like, I don't know who the hell this guy is, but I want to talk to him. So
hey, you know what? He's worth having come in.
And we drank a lot of whiskey and talked about the possibilities and everything. And basically what he said was, we want to bring video production in-house, and we want specifically to be able to work with Colonel Applegate. So Colonel Rex Applegate, close combat instructor for the OSS during World War II. And he said, if Colonel Applegate likes you, you've got the job. If he doesn't like you, nice try.
Sorry.
So the 94 Soldier of Fortune convention, they flew me back out from Hawaii to Las Vegas, and they said, we want you to spend the weekend helping Colonel Applegate out at his booth. So met the Colonel, helped him set up his booth, helped him sell books, whatever he needed, helped him out for that weekend. And throughout the entire thing, he was grilling me. It's like, okay, what do you know about me? What do you know about my books and all this kind of, all this kind of stuff. I had read Kill or Get Killed, which is kind of his seminal work back when I was like 13, 14 years old. Taught myself how to point shoot with a BB gun based on what I learned in there. And, when he would ask questions, I had the right answers. And ultimately it led to Paladin accepting me and creating a position for me as a video production manager for Paladin. And the first projects I did were working with Colonel Applegate.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. Here you were buying their stuff at 13, then you writing books for them, and then going to work for them. I mean, that's
so went from customer to author to employee.
That's pretty incredible.
I was the only person who ever made that progression.
For somebody, that's not common. I don't think Wow. And how long were you with them for?
10 years.
10 years.
So, 10 years. And that was, I consider that to be kind of my graduate level education in martial arts, self-defense, shooting, all that type of stuff. Because what I wanted to do as a video production manager, what you're trying to do is select projects that are obviously commercially viable. You want something that people are going to buy, but you're also, the way I looked at it is I want to try to document things that people have not documented in video form before. If you have a martial artist who, has some obscure skill or something like that, or somebody who just hasn't gotten an opportunity to share their art and it's just not well known, how do you present that in a way that becomes part of that person's legacy and becomes part of, the martial arts library at large?
Yeah.
So it was, for me, it was awesome because I got to work with just some amazing people. So from the shooting side, I had Colonel Applegate, Jim Cirillo, former NYPD Stakeout Unit member, one of the true modern day gunfighters. From the sniping side, John Plaster. So a lot of folks from the firearm side, and Kelly Mccann also from the firearm side, Gabe Suarez. When you look at the martial arts side, James Keating, Kelly Warden, Joe Simonette, Rick Hernandez, just the list goes on and on. Just some really, really great people who being able to share their knowledge and to share their art through video was just it was a dream job for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, so you may want to any other, like, we consider your Nobles project, like what you did for them, like, as far as, I guess, recognition or whatever. Noble.
I mean, the most noble stuff is obviously the stuff with Colonel Applegate, because being able to take something from, you have somebody who's literally an icon, a legendary figure, close combat trainer for the OSS during World War II. I mean, just amazing. Jim Cirillo, same thing, being able to take somebody of that caliber. One of the most prolific authors during the time that I was there, and also one of the most versatile, was Kelly Mccann. So Kelly's background from the military special operations side just went across everything. So it's like, okay, let's talk combatives. Great. Kelly's combatives was awesome. Let's talk knife stuff. Most of his knife stuff was based on the Nikon stuff from Bob Casper. But same vein. When you look at the combat shooting side, his close combat shooting was the best I had seen up until that point, way light years ahead of what everybody else was doing. So when you look at, again, being able to document all that stuff, and for me, what was really compelling was being able to sit down with that person and crawl inside their head and say, okay, what do you want to teach them? And how do you send that message? What do they need to see to understand how you do what you do? And also for me, one of the things that, I've got a big martial arts video collection. And also during the time that I was video production manager for Paladin, we would have people send us videos all the time. And one of the most frustrating things was you've got a really talented martial artist who is not necessarily a great instructor. So conveying their message to the communication side maybe wasn't as good as it could be. And the camera work sucked. So now what you have is the potential to learn tons of stuff from somebody, but the means of delivery falls short.
Okay.
So what I looked at was, okay, when somebody can't convey the message, how do you fill in the blanks? When you're looking at being able to make something truly instructional as opposed to infotainment, what camera angles do you need? So I started looking at doing multiple camera angles, overhead angles, doing really dynamic handheld videography and stuff like joint locking. We did the Beyond Kempo stuff with Joe Simonette. And I said, okay, I want to do the camera work. I want to literally put a full-size camera like right over your shoulder and work with you as you go. So he's going through a multi-step joint lock flow. And as he's doing that, I'm climbing all over him and literally going as close to first-person perspective, as close to POV as you could possibly get.
Wow.
And now when you're trying to learn, you see somebody doing, I'm doing Kota Gaish, outside wrist lock. When you're looking at it, two guys facing each other and you're, 15 feet away, you're like, I don't know what he's doing.
Right.
You get the camera position right over his shoulder and you see that he's reaching in, thumb down, grabbing, coming back this way. And you're basically creating that mind's eye view of left and right sides. You're creating a mental image that you can duplicate when you do the technique. For me, that was what I wanted to really accomplish. How to convey that stuff.
Awesome. And then so from Jay on here, philosophy of learning your draw. So
it's actually earning your draw.
Earning your draw. Oh, maybe it was a typo on his when he I'm at PM me. Okay.
Yeah, it's so when we look at earning your draw, what we mean by that is, like even if you look at traditional Filipino knife work, okay, so it's like you get to that point, hey, we're going to learn knife. So you start off here. I got my trainer in my hand. You got your trainer in your hand. You start doing stuff, and it's like, wait a minute, how did we get here? How did this happen?
Yeah.
Again, from a self-defense standpoint, it's even more important because once you're doing those skills, you've already there's a lot of stuff that should have happened before that, as far as justifying having your knife in your hand. And when you look at again the mechanics of the knife you'll actually carry, most people are going to carry a folding knife.
Mm-hmm.
So a folding knife, unlike a fixed blade where you simply draw it and you go, with a folding knife you have the mechanical operation of actually getting the blade out and open. So when we talk about earning your draw, what it comes down to is, again, a self-defense perspective, you have the physical technique of this guy gives me an angle one and I do a cruzada and I do this and this and this. All the stuff that happens before that is the important part. So that's, okay, this guy's coming up on me and he's walking up and I see him doing pre-incident indicators. He's looking around. He's doing all this hinky stuff. He's looking sketchy. It's like, this doesn't look right. He's walking. I see his left hand moving, but his right hand is hidden behind his leg. So now I'm setting boundaries. Hey, man, stay back, stay back.
Yeah.
You got your hand. And I essentially, everything that leads up to a physical attack. And you realize, okay, this guy raises a tire iron. He's defined the terms of our relationship. I'm justified in using a lethal weapon. Now I've got to get my folder out of my pocket, get it open, and be able to do all that before I can do anything with it. Typically, what that means is you're going to have to do something empty-handed to mitigate the threat and then earn the time to get your draw. So what we're looking at is integration of empty hand skills and immediate defensive actions, and then earn that time to get your knife out and be able to bring it into play. Yeah. So that's what we mean by earning your draw. It's not a given that, oh, this guy's going to come up and say, I got a tire iron. You got a knife? Let's fight.
Yeah.
It's not that simple.
Sometimes you got to deal with the threat to create opportunity, right? I mean,
right. So you look at even stuff like, passing drill. You look at, bikini passing drill and all that kind of stuff. You practice that, and you look at typically going to a wrist lock and a disarm. We typically will look at that as, if I can pass the weapon, I'll pick it up, deflect it, eye strike, step back, guard, draw. And that becomes a way of taking, again, traditional Filipino skills, but then adapting that to how do I get my weapon into the fight.
Gotcha. Yeah, wow. Get somebody here. Let me see. Aloha from Hawaii, Guru Dean Franco, Guru Mike. Would you mind asking him when the custom Delica or Endura will be available again? Also, just getting started with NBC. Thanks to Guru J. Love the program. So I guess his question is, besides the compliment he just left you, is when, if so, will the Delica or Endura will be available, the custom?
Yep. So what he's talking about is what's called a Jandura and a Jandelica. Okay. So basically, when actually I might even have, I won't dig for it now, but anyway, the Endura is one of Syderco's bread and butter knives. Out of the box, it's over 3.5 inches. So I couldn't carry it legally in Colorado. So when I carried an Endura, what I did was I ground it down, shortened the blade so the handle stayed the same length, had a full grip, but I shortened the blade to make it legally legal to carry in Colorado. The Delica, similar thing. I had a student who works at a federal building in Washington, D.C. Federal buildings, 2.5-inch blade length limit. Same thing, Chicago and Boston, 2.5-inch blade length limit. So I started taking Delicas, which out of the box have a 3-inch blade, grinding those down. I also take the jimping, the texturing off and smooth them out. And those became the Jandura and Jandelica. Those are sold through 5x5 Combat Solutions. So I custom grind every one, sell them to 5x5. They sell them out into the world. The problem is, right now, Syderco is very back ordered. During the pandemic, business was really good. The stimulus checks were retail therapy for a lot of people who were knife fans.
Oh, interesting.
So actually sales were really good. And then what you also have is now the difficulty as post-COVID, the world is trying to get back on track. There's so many supply chain delays that people don't realize. how many steps there are in the process. When you look at steel getting from one point to another, when you look at raw materials going from one point to another, when you look at boats, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but right now there are a lot of ships that are anchored offshore, off the west and east coast, because there's not enough guys to offload the ships in the ports. So a lot of products are way back ordered because they're sitting off the coast waiting to come off the ship. So the problem right now is getting the raw knives for me to be able to grind. So the good news is what we're doing is changing gears a little bit. And this is a little bit of a spoiler alert. So we had been doing the saber ground versions of the Delicate Endura. We're going to do a gray handled full flat ground version. I was able to get a decent quantity of those, and I'm working on grinding those right now. So those will be to 5x5 within the next probably 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, well, good. All right, so there you go. There you have it. So then, we'll just say here, books. So 21 books. Am I correct?
I don't think it's 21. I think you may be combining books and videos. Books is about 14, I think.
So maybe with the videos, 21?
With the videos, we're into several dozen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what? All right. So before you went to go work for Paladin, you started writing anyhow. And was the Blowgun, that was the first
So
book?
Blowguns was the first book. Knife Fighting: A Practical Course was second. Street Steel was third. I also did Homemade Martial Arts Training Equipment, Mccann Construction Manual. Did a book called Speak Like a Native. I'm learning foreign languages for Paladin as well. Bullseyes Don't Shoot Back, which I co-authored with Colonel Applegate. Contemporary Knife Targeting, which I co-authored with Chris Gross. The Best Defense. Then I also did, I've written a couple books actually since I've been with Syderco, for Syderco. Yeah. So like the story of the warrior knife, I wrote that book. I rewrote the book on, it was actually Harold Muller's book on knife throwing. I re-edited that book. Yeah, so.
Because this one here, I looked up this one, but this one here on Amazon, I think was like $700. So obviously, well,
you want to buy one?
What's that?
You want to buy one?
Yeah. But because somebody kept telling me, like, you gotta get this book. It's it's a must read. This, that, and the other thing. And so for kicks and giggles, I went on Amazon and like, and so obviously, I mean, so what year did this come out?
That came out around 2006, I believe it was, something like that. So the story behind that, this relates very closely to NBC. So there's if you go back to the World War II era stuff, W.E. Fairburn, William Ewart Fairburn, Shanghai Municipal Police during the early part of the 20th century, became the close combat instructor for the British Commandos during World War II, also taught the OSS initially, worked with Colonel Applegate early part of World War II. So in his books, he had a thing called the Timetable of Death. And the Timetable of Death was basically a chart of the human body, showed all the major arteries, and supposedly showed this chart where it's like, how deep is it below the skin surface? How long does it take for somebody, when that artery is severed, to bleed to unconsciousness? And then how long does it take for them to bleed to death? Okay. So in seconds, exactly how long this is supposed to take. Chris Gross, who was the co-author of this book, was a Littleton, Colorado law enforcement officer. Great guy, longtime martial artist. And he was a PPCT, Pressure Point Control Tactics, one of the major law enforcement defensive tactics curriculum. He was a master instructor for them, including their counter knife stuff. They were using Fairbairn's table as part of their curriculum, part of their courseware. And Chris had heard about NBC, heard about the approach that I took to stopping power and everything. And he came to me and he said, hey, I want to find out about Fairbairn's timetable. What do you know about it? I said, well, I asked Colonel Applegate about that when I worked with the Colonel. And he basically said, one of the biggest problems during World War II was taking somebody who was like an accountant last week and turning him into a trained killer so you could send him to war. So everyone wanted to do the patriotic duty, but getting somebody to actually have that fire, that fighting spirit and everything was difficult because they weren't natural born combatants. Okay. So I said, in a lot of cases, what we did was we lied to them, meaning that they would tell them stuff that would instill lots of confidence, even though it wasn't technically accurate. And he said, as far as I know, Fairburn stuff was never medically validated. There was never any scientific basis to it whatsoever. But what it did is, if you believe that you took your Fairburn Sykes commando knife and you stuck it in a German's neck, and 5 seconds later he wouldn't try to kill you anymore, it gave you the confidence to do that.
Okay.
So it became institutionalized bullshit, but for a good reason.
Right. Okay.
So Chris was like, okay, well, if that's the case, we need to figure out what the real timetable would be. So Chris went to the Denver medical examiner, so the head of the coroner's office in Denver, and he basically said, I want to take this same timetable and I want to make it medically valid. He looked at it and he said, what you need to do is work with our vascular surgeons. So he hooked Chris up with the vascular surgeons. What they did was they went through and they figured out scientifically how the body bleeds out. So what it comes down to is average adult male, how much blood is in his system. Okay. Based on that, when the heart beats, every beat, how much blood does it pump through?
It's pumping out.
For each one of the arteries, what portion of the total blood volume does it carry at any one time? So like the carotid artery, you got bilateral carotid arteries where you'd feel a pulse in your neck. This is 7.5% of your blood flow. Okay. Radial artery, 5%. Brachial artery here, 10%. So what you look at is how much do you have to lose as far as total blood volume to hit shock, unconsciousness, and death. 20% total volume is shock, 30% is unconsciousness, 40% is death. So basically at that point, you don't have enough blood volume to oxygenate your brain to keep it alive.
Your brain, right. Okay.
So now you look at all that stuff, the final component, which Fairburn didn't even address, is heart rate. So obviously if your heart is beating faster and you're bleeding, you're going to bleed faster. If your heart is beating slower, you're going to bleed slower. He never took any of that stuff into consideration. So what Chris did was, with the help of the Denver medical examiner and professional vascular surgeons, figured out this is what Fairburn's timetable should have been. And in the process, what he realized was Fairburn's timetable was way off. When he's talking about the idea of 5 seconds to bleed to unconsciousness when this is cut, totally off base. It actually takes you over a minute, even at an elevated heart rate, to bleed to unconsciousness with a severed carotid artery. So essentially what he did was he totally disproved Fairburn's timetable. So Chris did all the research. Chris didn't have any writing skill, or his writing skill was limited. Let's put it that way. He came to me and he said, I want to go back to PPCT and say, you know what, here is a more accurate version of Fairburn's timetable. Update your courseware and teach police officers more medically valid stuff. Give them the real information. So I helped him write a white paper for PPCT. Just as we were finishing that up, tragically, Chris died of a heart attack. So he died at 33 years old and left a wife, a daughter, and an unborn second child at the time. So what I did was I went to Paladin Press and I said, here's this guy who passed away in the middle of this awesome thing. We had contracted for a book with Paladin on that. I said, I want to finish the book in his honor and sign all the royalties over to his family. So basically I finished the book, Paladin published it, and during the time that it was in print with Paladin, all the royalties went to Chris's widow and his family.
Awesome.
The problem became when Paladin closed its doors several years ago, all the stuff that was readily available when it was still in print. Now you go on Amazon and it's like you can't get it anymore. So scarcity drives up price. So now you see prices $800 for that book. So a lot of people have said, well, just bring that book back into print. I've actually contacted Chris's widow and asked her about that. She got her attorney involved, and unfortunately the attorney did what attorneys often do, which is overcomplicate everything. And we could never come to a happy conclusion for that. So I share a digital version of that book through my distance learning program. So anyone who is a member of the distance learning program, that's available to them through that, but I don't sell copies out of respect for my original relationship.
Yeah, right. Because one of the questions here was, hey, will that book ever be republished? And we just got.
There is a guy in Ohio who is doing bootleg copies of it, and I'm in the process of tracking him down with a cease and desist letter.
It's always got to be
If you want the information, the bottom line to the information, it's pretty simple. People don't bleed quickly enough to consider bleeding people out an effective way of stopping them in a fight.
If you want it, like, I guess, a summation. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Okay, and we got your first video. Somebody wanted to ask, are they still out? And the second part of the question was from this was, do you consider them still relevant for today?
So my very first videos on knife stuff was shot back in 1991, I think it was. Those I did with James Webb, and those are, fortunately, they're not still out there because everything is a stepping stone. It should be. And one of the things about NBC is, I kind of tell a joke when I teach, because we'll have guys come from traditional martial arts, and I'll say, okay, what art are you from? And they'll mention somebody, it's like, I do Kyokushinkai Karate or whatever it is. Okay, great. So Masaoyama's greatest credential today is that he's dead and he doesn't have to answer questions anymore. And people laugh, and it's like, well, it's true. So when you look at a traditional martial art, it kind of becomes frozen in time when the founder dies. So the intellectual process that he used to develop the art, and what's interesting, especially when you look at arts that are multifaceted enough to be able to provide different applications. So when you look at all the tuite stuff, the pulling hand stuff of traditional karate, okay? So people doing reverse punches and everything, it's like, what's this opposite hand doing? Well, it's pulling backward. Well, that's a joint lock. It's grabbing somebody and pulling forward to be able to, double your force. So there's a lot of function that goes along with it, and all that stuff is kind of somewhat grappling based. So when you look at the application of traditional movements, if you had a smart traditional instructor and he gets a big burly guy who comes into his class, and he's got a guy who is taller, leaner, faster, it's like, okay, I'm going to teach you, tall, lean guy, how to strike and hit really well. You're more burly and strong. I'm going to teach you how to use the same techniques to grapple. And the art actually had both applications within it. But when he dies, now you have these two guys who are like, well, it's for this. No, it's for this. And they argue over what it is when in reality it's both.
Got it.
And when you see how arts have diverged over time because of those arguments, and you see how information is lost, what it comes down to is, as long as I'm alive, my early videos should become progressively obsolete.
Yeah, because you evolve. Right, you evolve.
If I continue to evolve, if I continue to get smarter, then when you look at something that I did 10 years ago and you say, well, you're doing it differently now, the answer is you're welcome.
Yeah.
Because I learned stuff between then and now. I should continue to evolve, continue to make stuff better, continue to make it easier to learn and make it more effective. If you think that, well, this art hit its pinnacle, back in 1506, and we haven't learned anything since then. Again, what you're doing is you're preserving a cultural entity. You're not learning effective self-defense.
No, right. You're just, preservation.
Might as well do kabuki dancing or something like that, because you're not really taking advantage of all the knowledge that's come our way since then.
No, well said. He also has the advanced folders.
So when you go back to the Paladin stuff, fighting folders, advanced fighting folders, mastering fighting folders, there are still elements within those that are useful. When you look at the training of the flow drills, what we call a chess game within NBC, which is the ability to flow from one drill to another, you've got great examples and great overhead camera angles of how that process occurs. The targeting information in those videos is obsolete. So when you look at the Martial Blade Concept series, even that, when I go back and look at the early volumes of that, those really need to be updated. And that's one of the reasons I created the distance learning program, is to be able to selectively, if there's one lesson that becomes obsolete, what we have within that program is I can take that lesson, archive it, so we don't pretend we never did that. I'm not going to say, a lot of times what you'll have is revisionist history in the martial arts. Oh, I never taught that guy. I never did that technique or whatever it is. And it's like, well, I got pictures. I got video of you doing that.
Yeah, wait, I got pictures of you on my wall. Yeah.
And it's like, no, they photoshopped me in with Elvis. That wasn't me,
Yeah, I know.
We don't do that. We don't do the revisionist history thing. Instead, what we do is we archive the old stuff and we say, okay, this has been replaced by this newer version that works better, and this is why.
Okay. Neat. All right.
Yeah. So the older stuff, fighting folders, it's there for historical value, and there are some learning elements of it that are still useful. But what you need to do is really look at the newer material and then go back and look at the old stuff and say, okay, is there a better reference? Is there a better view of something from the old stuff, or simply appreciate how far we've come since the old stuff?
See the evolution. Right.
Yeah. Right. This old stuff that made sense. This makes more sense. And that way you understand, you have a deeper understanding of the thought process behind it.
No. Yeah. All right. So as far as your students go, and I just always like to ask instructors, what do you try to instill in them? Just far as besides physical techniques, tactics, concepts, all that, but is there a common theme you like to instill in them, regardless of how long they're with you or their tenure, rank, or regardless?
Probably the most important thing, because if I teach a seminar, for example, I have students for maybe 2 days. Okay, they're still my students, and my goal is to give them the best influence, best information that I can during that time. So I have to be really selective about, okay, what is the big lesson that we get? So I have actually a pretty consistent, somewhat rehearsed close that I do for all my seminars, where I thank everybody. It's like, hey, thank you for taking interest in what we had to offer. Hope you found it interesting. Hope you found it, that there were elements of it that were useful for you. But the main thing that I want people to get out of it is to have that high standard of logic, and to have that high standard of, if you're going to do something for self-defense, you need to understand what you're trying to accomplish. You need to understand why it works and why it's going to stop an attacker from a physiological standpoint. So if you're doing a technique, if you're doing something, you don't understand why you're doing it, you don't understand what it is, you don't understand what it's trying to accomplish, how it's going to physiologically stop somebody else, you're doing something in a very misguided way. There's a lot of hope that goes along with that, but not necessarily a lot of predictable, reliable function. So what I tell people to do is, whatever you choose to do for self-defense, you may have gone through a whole weekend of NBC training and say, you know what, I really didn't like it, I want to do something else. Okay, great. If you do something else, hold it to the same standards of logic that we try to establish.
Yeah.
So if somebody says, okay, cut this guy's carotid artery. Okay, you want me to cut his carotid artery? How soon after I do that will he physiologically react to that wound and no longer be able to try to kill me? And can you establish that in some scientific way? If you don't get that answer, it's like, well, this is more lethal. He's going to die. Okay. Is he going to die soon enough to not kill me first? Oh. And when you start asking those hard questions, all of a sudden you establish a high standard for what you trust and what skills you're willing to invest your time in.
Wow, I like that. Yeah. Well, so at least they're getting, that's neat what you're leaving them with and all that. And
that's what it comes down to. Anything in self-defense, when you look at it, if somebody says, okay, you hit this guy. Okay, great. If I hit him, again, not to bust on anything in particular, but when you look at some of the Krav Maga knife defenses, you'll see them do universal block. So they're blocking to basically block and punch to the face. So it's like block and punch to the face. It's like, okay, why is it you punch so damn well when he has a knife that you only need one punch? Okay, why is that? And it's like, well, there's no more technique that goes along with that. Or why is it that, you kick him one time when he has a knife, and it's like, there's got to be, if that didn't work, what happens next? There's got to be some kind of closure there that allows you to say, okay, if I do this, predictably, this is what's going to happen, and I live to see the result. And if the technique doesn't provide that, then it's like, okay, I'm wasting my time. I need to look a little bit harder.
Yeah. Especially. That's I've seen a lot of that, right? You know, the block hit. You know what I mean?
You know, and it's also one of those things where I really encourage people. There've been books around. Like one of the first books that influenced me was The Medical Implications of Karate Blows. So this was and I think it was a Tuttle book or something like that I bought back in the 70s. And it was all Shotokan karate and everything, but it was written by a doctor. And you had him talking about, okay, if I do an elbow strike, if I grab the back of somebody's head and I do an elbow strike and I hit him right here,
right.
Okay, what am I going to do? Well, it's called a bursting fracture. So what you're doing, it's like squeezing the rind of a watermelon until it breaks. And what you're trying to do is break the maxilla across here. Or if you do it against the mandible, this is the way it breaks. If I do a hammer fist to the collarbone, how does that work? And he was going through all the mechanics of how you basically destroy specific anatomical structures on the body with specific technique. And I'm reading this book and it's like, okay, this is what you need to do to stop somebody. This is how you actually cause injury to somebody else to make them stop trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
So that should be the standard in everything you do. So I got my copy of Gray's Anatomy and started reading through that, and everything that I've done. When you look at a technique, what you're trying to do is quantify the physiological damage that you're causing. And if you can't do that, then whatever technique you use, it may not be up to the task.
Yeah, it might not be. Right. Interesting. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Coming from a karate book now, you know what I mean? That's pretty amazing. So what, a question here from Chris, and you know, what are you saying? You had the seminars, the camps, obviously you have instructors, you know, throughout the states and I'm sure elsewhere. His question is it difficult to keep quality control?
Yes, it is. I've worked really hard to develop not only the NBC system, but also to develop the teaching methodology to convey it. And people ask about, is there an instructor certification program at NBC? Yes, there is. So what we have is the first testing level that we would have is certificate of proficiency, and that's basically kind of the equivalent of a black belt. So you're validating all of your physical skills on demand.
Gotcha.
What goes along with that is potentially associate instructor. And the reason I say potentially is because what we also do during that process is we say, okay, for this technique, explain to me why it works. Explain to me what the levels of stopping power are. Essentially, the entire intellectual side of why NBC is the way it is, why it works, why the various structures are the way they are, literally the nuts and bolts of the system. And if somebody can't answer those questions under the stress of the test, if they can't answer them to me, then they can't explain them to a student. They're not supposed to be an instructor. So they may become an affiliate instructor, which is a lower level. It's also somebody who's got good NBC knowledge, but maybe hasn't gone through the testing process yet. But to become a fully certified instructor, what we do is we take the associate instructors and say, okay, great, go out and teach for a couple of years. Like, what do you mean? And it's like, I want you to go and teach so that you have the opportunity to present the entire system and to be able to explain it to students, to answer questions, and to essentially perform as an instructor. You know, there's the old saying, you know, those who can do, those who can't teach. Well, what if the do is to teach?
Yeah.
Okay, that's why we have degrees in education and all that kind of stuff. So the teaching aspect of it, there's so many martial artists who get their black belt and say, okay, I'm an instructor now. And it's like, have you ever actually taught anybody? Have you ever explained how to do stuff? And again, you'll have these martial arts savants who can, you know, see somebody do a technique and be able to mimic it. And it's like, okay, they're really good. And it's like, yeah, they're good at doing it, but they can't explain it. So to become a fully certified instructor, when you come back, you go through the entire testing process again, do the entire physical part again. And then what I have is literally a deck of 3x5 cards with every critical skill, every drill, everything else in the system written on them. Shuffle up the cards, you pick a card, and it's like, okay, teach that skill. So you have to teach that on demand. And the people who haven't had the experience to be able to teach that skill, in a lot of cases, they'll choke and they don't become certified instructors.
Right.
What ends up happening throughout the entire process as people go to teach, and going back to the quality control thing, is everyone wants to put their stamp on something. We're all individuals. We all have individual personalities and everything. And I get that. But people spend so much time trying to put their spin on stuff that they lose the value of what I've been doing for the 20 plus years that I've been teaching NBC, because I've been going around teaching seminars, and it'll be like, okay, I'll do the A/B testing just like direct marketing and stuff like that. I'll teach this one way one time, I'll teach it another way another time, and I'll see when I get light bulbs going off and when you get that mouth breather look where everyone's kind of like, what's going on? I don't get it. And when you get consistent light bulbs, it's like, okay, I got it. I understand how to explain this. And then you get a different group and you teach it to them and they don't get it. And then you refine it. So what it comes down to is the teaching methodology became very highly evolved over time. And when I teach my guys, it's like, use these words. Yeah, but I like to explain it this way. And it's like, okay, when you've taught a few hundred people and you've taught it my way and you've taught it your way, and you can prove to me that your way allows them to learn faster.
Yeah.
Because I've already done that. So maintaining quality control becomes difficult. And the thing is, you'll ask people, and this is human nature again, you'll ask people, do you understand this? Yeah, I get it. Okay, great. Okay, so go teach that guy. So one of the things I'll do all the time is I'll have, if an assistant instructor, if there's a guy who, like, if the hosts that I have for my seminars and everything, I've been working with most of them for years. So if I'm doing a seminar in Ohio or something like that, which is the next one I have coming up next month, what we've agreed on with my host is if there's another instructor out there who wants to come, you comp him. He comes to the seminar free, because that's his instructor development opportunity. So we have him as an assistant instructor, but also he gets to go through my teaching methodology again. And as he's helping other students, I can kind of listen in and say, okay, what is he saying? Is he explaining this stuff right? Is he off base? So it becomes an ongoing instructor development process. And what's great about it is we can also do stuff like, I'll be in the middle of a seminar, I'm looking around, scanning the floor, and it's like, okay, those two guys in the back, guy with the blue shirt, guy with the white shirt, what are they doing wrong? And all the instructors will look, and it's like, you don't see that, do you? Okay, let's analyze. So now we start working from the feet up. We look at, where are their feet? What are their body mechanics? What's the knife hand doing? What's the live hand doing? I walk them through that process, and we'll finally get to the point where they're making the mistake. And it's like, oh, okay, I see it now. Great, go fix it.
Yeah.
Go follow him over there and listen to what he says to try to fix it. That's an ongoing process, but it requires lots of time. That's another reason I came up with the distance learning program. So when people say, well, I remember it this way. Well, I remember it this way. Okay, well, go back to the DLP, watch that lesson, see what I say, see what words I use, and that's the definitive answer. Okay. That's where the quality control comes in, and that becomes, anytime that there's an issue, the great thing about it is we add material to that every month. I typically add about 30 to 45 minutes of video to it. There's over 65 hours of stuff on it right now. And if somebody comes up and says, you know what, I tried teaching this guy this and I hit a wall and he just couldn't get it. Can you go over that in detail? How do you teach it? That becomes the next lesson for the DLP.
Okay.
So that becomes an ongoing learning process as well. And it's maintaining consistency is difficult because everybody's different. Everybody will tell you, I get it, I understand, I know how to explain it. But until they've done it and they've done it repeatedly and gotten it right and gotten consistent results, they don't have it.
But Lisa, it sounds like you put default systems in place to, to make sure, to assure,
we're doing the best we can. I mean, we recently had an instructor development workshop. I'll do workshops only for instructors and bring them in, and we'll do stuff where it's like, okay, cool. Again, pick a card, bang, they pull a card out. And say, okay, you get to teach cover and slash. Great. Go ahead and teach cover and slash. And he'll go out there and teach it. And then it's like, okay, great. What did he get wrong? And then all the other instructors have to chime in. We go around the room and it's like, well, I think he got this part wrong. No, that was right. What he missed was this and this and this. And then what I see through that process is, okay, you were watching him do this as if you were watching students perform it. And you missed the performance characteristics that he needed to hit. You thought that he did a great job, but he missed this and this and this. So you wouldn't have done any better.
Right.
And what that allows us to do is refine the entire process. And literally with every skill, it's like, okay, these are the landmarks you need to hit in teaching that skill. Let's pick another one. Let's do it again. And we just hammer home that methodology.
Wow. It sounds like it's working. So Where are you? So, okay, this has been fantastic, by the way. I mean, we're coming close here. What so what are your future goals? You know what I mean? Like, far as I guess yourself, system, what have you, and what's coming down the pipeline?
My primary goal in creating my instructors and educating my instructors, I don't have this goal of having, hundreds of instructors. I want to
Yeah.
have good guys who are into MBC because they understand what it really means. And what I mean by that is we have a saying, you don't have to fight like me, you just have to fight well. And what that means is if you have a tall student, a short student, a fat student, a skinny student, somebody who's really strong, somebody who's really frail, whatever it is, your goal as an instructor and your responsibility as an instructor is to meet all their needs. So when we teach MBC, we teach, okay, here's this basic thing. You need to have a response where you stay on the inside for an angle one. If he throws an angle one and you can't back up and you got to work on the inside, what do you got? Okay, you're smaller. You need two hands. We're going to teach you a shoulder stop. You're a little bit bigger. We're going to teach you a meet for an angle one. You can block with one hand.
Okay.
So everyone gets to kind of take that first trip down the buffet line and sample everything.
Yeah.
And then what we do as instructors is we look at it and say, this technique is best for you. So against this attack, get reps on this. And that process, the evolutionary process that led us there, the thought process that created MBC, that created CBC, it's like the old saying when they say, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Well, we say if you explain something to somebody, they get it once. If you teach them how to think, then they learn to think critically for themselves, and they continue that same process. So what I want to do, my goal is to teach my instructors how to think and teach them how to teach other people how to think. So the high standards of logic, the evolution of the system, everything that's brought us to where we are right now, that continues. So we don't suffer what a lot of traditional martial arts suffer, which is, the guy who was in charge died. So now the thinking stops and we'll all argue.
Yeah. Now there's going to be no growth or
So now you end up with this, well, he said this. Well, in my notes, it said this. What I want them to do is to continue to have that critical thought and to use that to resolve those differences and to let the system continue to evolve long beyond my lifetime, their lifetimes, had that critical process continue.
That's awesome. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I think, I have an offer for you down the road to come back on. It could be like you, Keating, and Kelly. That would the big three in one show. That would be something, huh?
That would be awesome. That would be outstanding. I'd be up for that anytime.
Yeah, if you can, because obviously you're in touch with those guys more than I am. I mean, I'm in touch with Kelly on here, James.
So with Kelly Warden.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't spoken to Kelly Warden in a while, but I mean, I worked with him quite a bit during the Paladin days.
Yeah.
His practical knife fighting courses. We did the 2 videos on that. We did a bunch of his stuff back in the day. All his Renegade JKD stuff.
Yeah, that would be something to think about. You know what I mean? But you'll have to get a hold of James. You'll have to get him.
I would do my best to try to persuade him, but I can't make promises.
No, I know you can't make promises, but I just thought it'd be neat, getting you 3 on here. That would be kind of neat. You know what I mean? But hey, something we could shoot for. I'm going to write it down. So I have an ongoing list as far as guests and and theme oriented and what have you. So I'm definitely going to write that down and see if we can make that happen.
That'd be very cool.
Yeah, but I really appreciate you coming on. I hope we didn't take too much of your time. We're coming up on 2 hours, so I hope.
My pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm honored to be here, and thanks to everybody who listened. Thanks to everybody who chimed in with comments and questions and everything. It was awesome. We've been trying to keep track of some of the stuff.
Yeah. There were
familiar with the medical implications of karate blows and the author of that. And, I just. Again, whether you agree with me or not, whatever, again, the same thing from this conversation and everything, I just encourage everybody, figure out what your goals are, as far as why you're studying, and then be true to those. And if it is self-defense, then just make sure that you have, a strong standard of logic, because it's your life, it's your family's life, family's lives. You want to learn the very best stuff that you can to try to keep yourself safe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been great. So what I do is I download this, and I'll send you the final YouTube version, and and all of that. So, but again, thank you so much. I truly enjoyed this, as well as the comments reflect that as well. So
awesome.
And all that.
But I have a question for you real quick.
Sure.
If I were to share a discount code with you, could you pass that out to all your viewers and everything? So what I did was create a 25% off discount for anybody.
Do you want to private message me it, and then I can
do that. I can show it to everybody right now. It's just FMA Discuss 21. Is that backwards? Of course it is. Yeah. So never mind. I think it came up backwards, but what I'll do is I'll text that to you, but it's FMA Discuss 21. So if you go to martialconcepts.tv and just go to the shop there, but I'll send you the link and everything so you can post it. I just appreciate everybody listening. If you're interested in any of my other stuff, I just wanted to express my thanks by giving you 25% off for the next few days. And if there's something that trips your trigger and you're interested, you can dig into it at a discount. So.
No, because the group has 6,000 members, so I'll put it right in the group. I mean, So
I will message that to you as soon as we finish up here.
Yeah, I'll definitely do it. Absolutely, 100%. I appreciate that, as well as I'm sure others will as well too. So, but you're not gonna hear the last of me, because I'm gonna follow up on that. The 3 of you. So
awesome, cool. Look forward to it.
All right, sir. You take care, and thank you so much again.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Right. Same here. All right, so I'm going to post that, folks. They're still watching. I put it in the group, and I'll probably put it here too. And man, 25% off. He's going to give me the coupon, so that's pretty nice of him. So I'm sure there's going to be some stuff on there. I'm definitely going to be checking out. Who is next? I got to jump off. I got a test run right now with Saturday's episode, which is Ryan Cordero and Sachi, Lightning Scientific guys who live in New Jersey. So so I got to run because they're going to be next. All right. So thank you all for watching, commented, and submitted questions. Take care.